You're listening to Monocle on Saturday, first broadcast on the 8th of February 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello there, it's Emma Nelson here, coming to you live from Midori House in London. This is Monocle on Saturday. A very warm welcome to the programme. We'll be going through the week's news and culture with the author and political journalist Terry Stiastny. She joins me now. Good morning, Terry.
Good morning.
What have you spotted?
Well, I'm afraid we're still going to be getting into what's going on in the United States and the impact that is having on the rest of the world, particularly looking at what's going on with foreign aid. And meanwhile, of course, there's an election going on in Germany. Voters there are a bit worried about outside interference, and we'll look at how political debate in Italy has gone barking mad.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Our traveller, Monocle's Georgina Godwin, is on her tour. She'll bring us an update from where she is and what she's been working on too. That's all coming up on Monocle on Saturday with me, Emma Nelson. First, though, a look at the news. 3 more Israeli hostages are expected to be released from Gaza today as part of the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas. 180 Palestinian prisoners will be freed too as part of the agreement, which seems to have been holding for 3 weeks. There are fears, however, that this could be derailed by Donald Trump's plan to turn the Gaza Strip into the Riviera of the Middle East. A judge in the US has said he will temporarily block Donald Trump's attempt to shutter the humanitarian agency USAID, which he has accused of corruption. Virtually all of the staff have been put on administrative leave this weekend, but that move has now been delayed. Donald Trump has asked Elon Musk to review US government spending in a number of departments. And France, Britain and Germany are among more than 70 countries which have signed a statement criticising President Trump's decision to impose sanctions on the International Criminal Court. The measures include freezing of the assets of ICC signatories and banning their travel to the US. And those are the headlines on Monocle Radio. So welcome, Terry Stiastny, to the studio. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
What's going on in your world at the moment? The book is still continuing, isn't it?
The book is nearly finished. I'm sort of wading through proofs at the moment and looking for all the mistakes which are certainly there and will probably leap out at me once I think it's actually finished.
Just remind us of what the book's about.
It's become worryingly appropriate. It is about sort of what's called black propaganda and fake news. This is historically during the Second World War, but obviously has got relevance for now.
And tell us a little bit. You began this in the sort of the Boris Johnson, Liz Truss era, didn't you? So was that what acted as the springboard?
No, well, I kind of realised that it had been influenced by that. I mean, I was visiting one of the locations where people had worked, and it was, a couple of days after Boris Johnson had resigned, and about, there was so much debate going on about, whether politicians tell the truth or not, and, how seriously they take it. But it actually began. Really, it was kind of a lockdown project, and I'd heard one news report which sort of sent me down a rabbit hole. And when I started researching it, a lot of the archives and things were still closed, and there were still delays of getting in. When to book a slot to go and visit, whatever archive it was, would take months because they said we can only have 2 people in at a time, separated by huge numbers of desks in between and that kind of thing. So, really made me appreciate, particularly at the moment, again, given what's going on now, the work that archivists do and how important it is to keep records and how important it is that we get to see them eventually.
Because one of the things that you wanted to draw our attention to, and ladies and gentlemen, it's going to be quite Musk and Trump heavy the next 30 minutes. Sorry about this. But stuff is happening apace. And one of the things you picked up on is that Trump has got rid of his archivist.
Yes, that seems. She seems to have said on LinkedIn to her contacts that she had been fired from the head of the National Archives, fired without warning and without cause. And it's been reported that Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, is now essentially in charge of the National Archives. Though again, there doesn't seem to be much actual due process going on here. We're not really, and of course, given all of the cases against Donald Trump as to what he did with National Archives in his previous term. And, you remember the pictures of all the boxes in Mar-a-Lago. Yeah, well, you can potentially see why, you might be a bit worried if you're a US archivist at the moment.
I mean, we have to get an archivist to sort of catalogue what is happening at the moment. I think they probably need about 30-fold increase in staff rather than getting rid of it. Yes, it looks like, I think her name is Colleen Shogan.
Yes.
And the whole plan is behind Donald Trump's intention to shake up the board of the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. And this is just another institution which he is effectively upending it. It's like he's taking he's going in with Elon Musk and there are large tables and he's just flipping them upside down and no one knows where this thing's going to land.
Well, yeah, and if you've tried to look at the USAID website recently, you will realise, how vulnerable not only the work that people do is, but even all the records of the work. The website is just no longer there. It basically says, as of Friday, people will be put on leave. So if you're trying to find any records or of their work and of what they've done on their website, that certainly wasn't there last time I looked. But interestingly, so there are reports this morning that a federal judge has temporarily blocked Donald Trump for putting USAID workers on paid leave. Judge Carl Nichols apparently issued a limited temporary restraining order in response to a lawsuit from unions. So I think this is where we're going to be now. This is going to be constant attempts, things that have been done without the due process. Because, of course, as everybody says, if you want to close down USAID, that might be a thing that Trump believes he wants to do, but this was an agency that was set up by Congress, and if it's going to be got rid of or drastically scaled back, that is supposed to be done likewise by Congress. It can't just be done by an executive order. And, the consequences that this could potentially have around the world, as it is at the moment, the consequences of the closure are just huge. And they range from everything. They range from, security in dangerous countries. We're looking after people who are, going to be hungry. There are healthcare issues. There are drug trials that have been stopped. There are, the USAID is the world's biggest aid donor, and particularly in areas like health. That is going to have immediate consequences if there isn't money to spend.
It has huge consequences. I know that a colleague of ours is married to an NGO worker in Jordan who lost their job out of nothing, out of the air last week. I think the BBC's Media Action team, who are funded by the United States USAID, are saying that their money is going as well. It's quite an astonishing thing, just how quickly all this is taking hold. But we have this order from, I think the name is it Judge Nichols, Carl Nichols, nominated by the US president during his first term. So he's effectively, not in direct opposition to Donald Trump, has agreed with the legal arguments from the unions and saying, look, this is not allowed to happen because there is this thing called the separation of powers, which is the executive and the judiciary and the police all are, in theory, supposed to act as checks and balances on each other. But you have this terrible thing now where that whole principle, which is sort of taught widely in politics, in law, in history, it's the stuff that makes sure that no one oversteps the mark, just seems to be, again, is one of the tables that's being upended.
Well, exactly. And so we were relying on, groups. I mean, in this case, in the USAID case, it was a emergency petition by the American Foreign Service Association, the American Federation of Government Employees, so the unions who are representing agency employees. We're relying on those people to go to the courts and for people like Judge Nichols to decide, at least temporarily, that this is something that should be overturned. And so that, you're hoping that there are people who are still defending the process, essentially. But also, obviously, I'm not sure how much international pressure from other countries really makes a difference at this point. But it's interesting that the British Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, who's been off on a visit to Ukraine, and he is describing this as the cuts to the US aid budget as a big strategic mistake. And he is pointing out that he says this will allow China to step in and further its global influence. The Guardian has been travelling with him to Ukraine, and, he is talking there about, the impact that this is going to have, given that saying the US accounts for $4 out of every $10 spent globally on humanitarian aid. And, he's saying that Britain, I suppose, did not really a similar thing. There was a separate government department, the Department for International Development, and that was folded into the Foreign Office. But that was done, with the correct processes. But David Lammy saying, development is a really important soft power tool, and he is worried that China and others step into the gap there and end up with China giving the aid and then having that influence.
David Lammy's got a bit of a sticky wicket with this one, hasn't he? Not least because he is one of those very, very skilled international politicians who knows how to say the right thing at the right time. Apart from the fact that a couple of years ago he said he criticised Donald Trump in very, very clear words. But also, I didn't know that he's friends with Barack Obama.
He seems to have quite a lot, but I think it's also been reported that he certainly was on pretty good terms with J.D. Vance as well. So he does have sort of contacts, I think, across the political spectrum in the US. How much those are friendships and how much. I think he certainly had met Obama on several occasions.
I think his wife had photographed a campaign, and there's a very good article in the New Yorker that I urge everyone to read, which has this profile of him. But it also sums up this difficult situation that the United Kingdom now faces at the moment, having found itself in a sort of like the bat in Aesop's fables, finding itself like neither American nor European, but striking out on its own. But the difficulty that Lammy faces is that he is of that sort of Obama-esque mind, which is when you see a problem, you try and solve it. You don't try and make it worse, and you try and see the practical aspects of manoeuvring yourself out of a problem. Whereas at the moment, the US administration seems to be, well, it does not seem to remotely sort of pay much attention to the international world. It will have to be deal striking. We can stop a Canadian tariff if we have if we have two chats with Justin Trudeau. They can stop an executive order going through if a court gets in the way. But that idea of problem solving and being open seems to be absolutely not the way forward at the moment.
No, and I think, what we probably have to get used to over the next 4 years is this idea that we're constantly going to have these sort of overnight surprises. And I don't know how long these will last. Suddenly in European time, you will get up and see, oh my goodness, what has Donald Trump said now? What has he, ordered? What has he abolished? When we heard about that Gaza was going to be the next Riviera and, run by America, and how seriously to take these things, because there are things that he is going to pronounce on and other things that he has pronounced on in the past. I mean, David Lammy here talking in Kiev, that was going to be solved in the first day, I think, was what Trump said, when he came into office. And Britain saying, well, look, the Ukrainians being clear, there's no ceasefire before negotiations. There's going to be, how long will a talks process potentially take at some future point? These are things that take a long time, and we're used to things proceeding in a more orderly fashion. That's exactly the phrase that I'm struggling for. And whether there are still going to be people that are saying, OK, look, that's what the president said, but we will proceed in an orderly fashion. But those orderly fashion people, I think, are quite likely to be fired.
I wonder what happens, therefore, with, just thinking back to earlier on this week when the UN Special Rapporteur, Francesca Albanese, was questioned about the Riviera in the Middle East idea. And she quite simply and quite clearly just went, this is nonsense. This is just, it's also nonsense. And she made the point that what the message that appears to be coming from Washington at the moment is that it is an isolationist approach that the US is taking, that Trump is taking. And she said, if that's what they want, then let's give it to him. Let's shutter the doors. Let them get on with it, and the rest of the world can just carry on doing its own orderly fashion thing. It's much easier said than done. But is there going to be a moment when those who have when the world, which has up until this point realised that the huge influence and reach of the United States into absolutely every single corner of our lives, we're just going to have to get on without them?
Yes, and I think, certainly, if you are currently working in an NGO, for instance, that had funding from USAID and you are worried as to where the money is now going to come from, people are going to look elsewhere. I mean, Britain's saying, the trouble is we haven't got the budget to be able to spend lots more money and fill in that gap. Yes, there are other countries that might be able to do that, but you just realise how much we do absolutely depend on the United States, possibly in areas that we don't always necessarily realise.
Apart from the fact that those who do business with the United States are probably going to be doing quite well at the moment. So you've got this dual political line that you have those who work for the NGOs or those who go for the rules-based order of things are thinking this is a huge problem, this is shaking the foundations. Whereas actually many people are suggesting that this year, if you're trying to do business, you do it with the US.
Yes, and I think, that is potentially an area, and I'm sure Trump will capitalise on that if he sees, the economy doing well and, if American companies are doing well. I mean, I think we might end up in an interesting area where people then, particularly say in the aid area or in sort of supporting free media, which is a thing that has been a big topic of debate as well, where, are we looking to rich individuals to try and fund things? Are we looking to people like, Bill Gates, who have been very involved in healthcare, for instance? But I think, everything else that we realise going on at the moment is that however benign and philanthropic rich individuals can be, they are not necessarily accountable. And even if they are doing the things you want them to do, is that a way that, that things should work? Is that part of the sort of the orderly process?
Thank you for that, Terry. We'll come back to you in a little bit later on to have a look at other bits of the newspapers this weekend. You're listening to Monocle on Saturday with me, Emma Nelson, joined in the studio by Terry Stiastny. You may well be wondering where Georgina Godwin is. She's still on her travels. She's off on assignment doing book tours. And actually, anybody who's had a look at her posting online, Terry, I'm greenly jealous of
I'm absolutely full of envy. She's travelling through Sri Lanka, through India, meeting fascinating people, staying in lovely places. Looks absolutely brilliant.
It's basically wine and saris, which is what we've had so far. She's been dressing up in the most fabulous clothes. She's been having wonderful times and speaking. I think she's with her brother, isn't she?
Yes.
She's out travelling with Peter, doing in the most beautiful book festivals. Georgina, we miss you, but at the same time, we are very glad that you are having such an amazing time. If you want to hear a bit more detail about what she's up to, then you're in for a treat. Here she is.
My international interlocutor travels continue. And this week, I'm at the Galle Literary Festival in the walled town on the coast of Sri Lanka. Since my last visit in 2019, tourism has expanded and I fear might be destroying the very essence of why this is such a gorgeous destination. A plethora of cheap hotels have been colonised by Russians and Ukrainians waiting out the war, British backpackers inexpertly piloting rental motorbikes through the narrow streets, and Australian cricket fans here for the Test match. But there are many high-end properties too, and I'm staying at one of them, the Lake House in Galle, a few miles from the centre. It's a contemporary home built by the water using Sri Lankan craftsmen and materials. It's owned and designed by architect Dale Jennings, who's made it as energy efficient and low impact as possible. Natural breeze from the sea and lake cool the house, supplemented with ceiling fans rather than air conditioning. And most of the hot water is heated using solar power. The staff, including a talented chef who makes use of the daily catch, are enormously efficient. When not occupied by the owner and friends, the lake house is available to rent. Highly recommend. I also recommend checking the loo before commencing any business, or one may be surprised, as I was, by a very intimate meeting with a frog. I'm not sure which one of us was more traumatised. My final recommendation is the book Brotherless Night by V.V. Ganeshananthan. Set during the early years of Sri Lanka's 3-decade civil war, the novel won the Women's Prize for Fiction in 2024. You can hear her talk about it in an archived edition of Meet the Writers. The socialising continues, with the local society mag featuring me and television presenter turned novelist Louise Minchin making a red carpet entrance to the opening night. And last evening there was a delayed Burns night party held on the beach. Crashing Waves competed with a local band playing 70s covers and a fabulous firework display, though it might have been wise to warm the table of former war correspondents in advance of the bangs. Writer Ben McIntyre gave the toast, but instead of haggis, we tucked into a fish biryani. At the festival itself, I'm talking about my own role in the book Exit Wounds by my brother Peter, who's with me. And again, you can hear a version of that conversation on Meet the Writers. I'll be chairing panels on the repatriation of cultural artefacts and navigating literature in multiple languages. I'm recording this sitting between the infinity pool and the lake. There are monkeys, huge monitor lizards, giant porcupines and a host of birds in the garden around me. And I'm sending love back to you in London or wherever you are in the world.
Yes, Georgina, we too are by an infinity pool and a lake with giant porcupines. Wow. That was amazing,
That
wasn't
sounds
it?
amazing. Please invite me.
Yes, can we
Next
come
I'll
now?
have a book.
Sorry, we're just abandoning Monocle on Saturday now, heading straight to the airport to sort of join.
It is cold and grey and wet in London, and I would like to be by an infinity pool or a lake.
In the warm. The power of words to transport us. Thank you very much indeed to that Georgina Godwin. We will be hearing more from her, no doubt, next week. Though staying here, no input, no porcupines, no fish biryani. Just the papers, which is fine. This is good. We could, there's much to be said of a cold February day in London. Terry Stiastny, tell us a little bit more about what you spotted. We were talking quite a lot about Donald Trump, but I think just one final focus on an article in the Financial Times, a big read, about the scythe that Elon Musk is taking to the US institutions.
Yes, this is a big read in the FT, as you say, definitely worth reading in detail because it's called Mr. Musk Goes to Washington, and it is talking about essentially the tactics, I suppose, rather than the strategy necessarily, the way that Elon Musk is going about, his intervention in various government departments. And, comparing this explicitly to what he did when he took over Twitter, which, of course, he now calls X, and just the turbulence of the process. Basically, he's saying he's enlisted the help of his inner circle. He has sent out these emails asking federal workers to accept redundancy, which is apparently the same phrase, a fork in the road that he used during Twitter restructuring, basically saying, look, my way or the highway, if you don't want to work for me in my way, where you just take a small number of people who are working super hard, who are good at coding and things, but they are not, good at, as we were saying, in other areas, due process, and saying how turbulent this process was. And he's saying former staff at Twitter, now X, they lost critical talent, they lost knowledge of how the systems worked, there were glitches. And, that's one thing when it's a social media site, a glitch affects a few people, but, nothing very important is going to happen. That is something completely different when you are doing this to, the US Treasury, for instance, or other government departments. Glitches can affect people's lives quite drastically. So, going in and doing this in a sort of Silicon Valley, move fast and burn things way has huge risks which are entailed in the process.
One of the things, there's an absolutely outstanding article by the Nobel Prize winner for economics, I think this year, Darren Acemoglu. It's also a very, very long read, and it talks about what happens when you destroy institutions. And one of the enormous points that he makes is that the United States is looked to as not just being the world's most powerful country, but the world's most powerful country when it comes to innovation and its ability to push and shape the future. And he said that a good democracy, and indeed an innovative country, requires strong institutions to enable innovation to happen. And if you get rid of the institutions which support that, you sow the seeds for a decline in a country, which is incredibly difficult to unpick. And I think one wonders that Donald Trump is obviously reshaping the institutions according to his agenda. So, for example, we were talking about the archives a little bit earlier. He was placed under arrest and he was investigated because of the fact that archives were discovered at Mar-a-Lago. So everything seems to be really pretty personal. And one wonders where the where this is actually going to end. I mean, is there any indication in the big read that you've got from the FT? FT brilliant this weekend actually on Musk and Trump. Is there any indication about what the long-term effects could be?
Well, not really. I mean, I think, this article is arguing that, there are constraints on the Musk's power, which will come, they say, from the competing priorities of the administration. So for basically saying if he starts to touch Social Security, if he starts to touch Medicaid, if he starts to touch the Defence Department, which of course, are huge amounts of federal spending. If you want to look where money could not be spent, that would be one of the first places you would probably go and look. If he then starts to touch that might be when even Republicans in Congress are actually going to go, well, hang on a second, perhaps you're going a little bit far with this. But I think, the question is, if you're not observing the process, how do we know exactly what he is doing, what his people are doing, unless you see, we've occasionally seen Congress people standing outside government buildings in Washington, D.C. saying, can we come in, and if not, why not? But, just trying to keep control of all of this is going to be really difficult.
Indeed. And Darren Asamoah's article pushes us into the future, which is an incredible sort of look at a very, very dark situation. It says it sets the scene with morale gone and key personnel fired. The US is ill-equipped to deal with emergencies. So it sets the scene for, and I'm quoting here, a series of catastrophic governmental failures. When new pandemics arrive, the response is haphazard. Independent media sources uncovered a glaring and dangerous lack of oversight of critical infrastructure. Then he pushes it further, saying the real extent to the damage clears only with a tech meltdown of 2030, which sounds like a long way away, but it's only 5 years. Economists and historians have now shown that a lot of this was the outcome of institutional failure. Gargantuan incumbents crush rivals first by using their financial might. This is, obviously it's a sort of an end of days scenario, but if you're Darren Asamoah, then you've probably got quite a good amount of intelligence and knowledge behind you to push it through. Anyway. Let us move on to, let's go to Italy for our final story, because I think we want to sort of lighten the load a little bit and perhaps examine something which is to do with politics, but when the wheels fall off, basically.
Yes, I was going to mention in passing, in Germany there's lots of people, about 75,000 people are expected to demonstrate in favour of democracy in Munich. So that's nice and good and encouraging, and all luck to them. In Italy, political debate seems to have really, I'm not sure if this is a new low for Italy or just a particularly odd moment. So an Italian MP called Augusta Monterulli appeared on a chat show during which she decided to drown out her fellow guest by barking like a dog. I mean, she wasn't... If you have to listen to the audio of this, it is very strange. It's kind of, she's like saying woof, woof, woof in Italian. She's going bow, bow, bow. So she's not doing a real dog noise, but it was very strange. And the opposition MP tried to speak, and every time he tried to speak, she basically barked over him, which is, no way to conduct a sensible political debate. But apparently this is the latest in a long string of insults in Italian politics, which, again, there's a serious point here, but let's lighten this up a bit.
Indeed.
So,
the Corriere della Sera, sorry to interrupt, the Corriere della Sera says that it's true that the Italian Parliament has become a fervent gymnasium of insults, but we've not got to howling, barking and growling. Oh, we do like the idea of a fervent gymnasium of insults.
Yes,
sounds quite athletic.
Includes calling people salamis, calling people goats. Once somebody used to call Berlusconi a psycho dwarf and a saliva salesman. So, I think, but, barking noises, as someone said, barking noises on TV, it's not witty, and it's not, so somebody who has written a whole book on the history of Italian political insults says the need to grab attention on social media has taken things up a gear, but making barking noises on TV is something different. It seems that when you have nothing to say, you'll shift from using words to using onomatopoeia.
It's funny, for whatever reason, I'm reading Animal Farm at the moment, the George Orwell, brilliantly devastating novel, and as I think it's Napoleon the pig who sort of takes over the reins and sort of rids the world of his rivals, such as Snowball the pig. When he can't say anything, and Snowball, his arch rival pig, is actually a much more eloquent character. He gets the sheep to shout 4 legs good, 2 legs bad.
Yes, yeah.
And the worse his the worse the situation is inside the meetings, the louder the sheep bleed. It suggests that possibly that sort of noises or animal noises is not a new thing. But I don't know what. Okay, let's throw this out. What kind of noise would you make if you're trying to sort of? We all shout blah 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 when people are being silly. But I really do hope that never happens at Monocle Radio. But what do you do when you want someone to stop talking?
Yeah, I don't know, but perhaps maybe you actually need to listen. I don't know who the presenter was, and I'm sure, again, not something that would happen here on Monocle. I think the presenter would normally intervene and say, will you stop it with the dog noises, or you're both going to be off air.
Especially with a full minute of barking.
Yes.
I wonder whether that's our cue to stop talking. Terry Stiastny, thank you so much for joining us in the studio, Monocle on Saturday. That's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to our producer, Desiree Bandley, and our studio engineer was Alan Whedon. And Monocle on Saturday comes back next weekend. For now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thanks for listening. Have a great Saturday and Sunday.